All right. Hey, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon from wherever you're joining. My name is Setu Raman. I'm the product manager for Azure OpenAI Batch, and I also have my colleagues, Sydney Myers and Halit Akar, who are also product managers in the Azure OpenAI. So today we are going to do a Ask Me Anything session, a live session, where we want to give you a quick overview of OpenAI Batch, some of the newest products that we have shipped, and take any questions that you might have. So we're going to be covering 3 topics. The first one is Azure OpenAI Batch. The second one is the new offering that we announced and we are shipping is Data Zone, which comes in 2 flavors currently. One is the Data Zone Provision, and the other one is Data Zone Standard. And the format is going to be, we're going to be giving you a quick overview of each of these topics. I'll start with the first topic, Azure OpenAI Batch, maybe spend like 5 to 7 minutes, take questions, and similarly, Sydney and Halit would do the same. And we're going to monitor your questions in the tech community chat and then answer it live here. So that's the format. So please keep the questions coming. Let's start with the first topic. So Azure OpenAI Batch, this is something that we shipped GA very recently in the past couple of weeks. The whole value proposition of this product is it allows you to process chat completions at scale with 50% cost. So that's the overall value prop. Let's look at some of the details now. Cost efficiency. So you'll be able to process your chat completions at 50% reduced cost to the global standard pricing. You also have a separate quota. That means that managing batch requests with an independent token quota will not affect your online quota, and it's pretty generous quota, which I'll show you in the next page. And we say that there's going to be a turnaround of 24 hours, a maximum turnaround of 24 hours is what it is. However, we've seen currently when there is not much workload in the system, it can turn around as quick as like 6 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is, right? So that's the overall value prop. You bring a huge workload of chat completions that you want to process. We are able to do it with half the cost, but you trade in latency for cost. So instead of just processing it in milliseconds, it can take up to 24 hours, but typically much faster. So that's the trade-off that you do. And this is how it looks. I'm going to give you a demo as well. So I'm going to skip some of these and we look at the demo. We have seen customers leverage the Azure OpenAI Batch product in a bunch of use cases, primarily around large-scale processing or asynchronous processing where you don't need an immediate response. And where there is a huge bulk data processing that's not even possible through online. We work with customers who have like a terabyte of data that they want to process, and it's too much time consuming. Or it can be just for evaluation. It's not a huge workload, but I can wait for some time and I can save some money, right? So these are some of the use cases here that people typically use for. And we support all the latest models you can see here are supported in Azure OpenAI Batch for 50% off with global standard pricing. And you can see, these are things that are there. I'm going to share the documentation link, which is, of course, going to have it again. And in terms of quota, I mentioned that we do have generous quota. So you can see for all these model families, GPT-4o, 4o mini, you have like various type of subscriptions here. And you can see how much tokens we get. If you have an enterprise subscription, for example, you get 15 billion tokens to start with, right? This means these are NQ tokens. NQ tokens are primarily number of jobs, number of tokens you can queue up. That's what it is. And for different subscription types, you have different default quota. This is just default quota. Doesn't mean this is what you get max, right? You can always request for more quota using the user interface, which I'll show you in a bit. And you can always request for more quota. Let me leave it there. We also shipped a couple of features very, very recently, and these are some really cool features that I want to call out. One is called the dynamic quota, which is when you create a deployment, this is the flag you need to enable called dynamic quota. This means that even if you have a reduced quota allocated to your deployment, if system has additional capacity, you'll just be able to overflow, opportunistically take advantage of more quota whenever system has availability. That's what it is. And the second one is a filter sort API. In the back, if you have a bunch of jobs, you want to be able to filter and sort them. So this is again a new API that we just recently shipped. I'm briefly recapping why batch, because it's efficiently able to handle large scale workloads that'll be impractical to process real time. Number two, benefit from 50% lower costs. And number three, minimize engineering overhead. Imagine teams having to maintain a bunch of jobs, having a separate framework for queuing them, monitoring them. So this Azure OpenAI batch takes care of that. Give you a really quick demo. So you see what that product is. This is the Azure OpenAI Studio you all probably aware of and already played with. And here you can see a batch jobs tab here. So you click there and you'll be able to create a batch job. And of course, I'm going to show you a user interface through which you can create a batch job, but you can create a batch job using a REST API, using Python SDK as well. And if you go to a documentation, which I can put a link in a bit, where you can see all the three options. And you can see a detailed example of this. And you can see all the region availability, model availability, and everything. Let's head back to our demo here. Step one of creating a job is making sure, uploading a file here. So here you upload a file, and I'm going to upload it to. Okay, first thing, I'm sorry, I did not show you how to create a deployment. So let's start from there. So you have to create a deployment. You go to the deployment page, and you can create a deployment here. For example, here I'm going to select the GPT-4o Mini, confirm. I'm going to select here global batch. That's the new deployment type that we have that's associated with the Azure OpenAI batch. I'm going to allocate how much quota, enqueued token limit that I'm going to allocate to this. Dynamic quota is enabled. I'm going to create this. This is done. Now I'm going to create a batch job. So go here, create a batch job, upload a file. So imagine when you do online, what you do, you create like an API request with a chat completion request in that, right? With batch, what you do is I will show you how the file, you just compile a bunch of chat completion requests in a file. The file can be 200 MB or 100,000 requests, 100,000 of these lines, right? So you look, in this example, I have like 3 lines. This is a JSON L format, okay? And you can see it's same old chat completions that you love. No difference. It's exactly the same chat completion. Only thing is we have like 3 metadata items. The most important one is the custom ID. So there's just a correlation ID. So here I can see for each of these records, I've got a custom ID. Why you need this is after the batch job is done processing, it's going to write like an output file in which you can find these custom IDs. So you'll know which response is for which request. That's pretty much it. So this is the request here. I've got the JSON file. I'm going to upload that. Going back to our demo, I'm going to open. It's uploading the file, and I'm going to submit the job. So a new job is created. You can see the batch job. It goes through various phases: creation, processing, finalizing. So why don't I open a job that we ran, and I'll show you how it looks like. So in this case, this job is already completed. I used the same input file before. I'll show you how the output file looks like. So it's exactly the chat completion output. There's no difference. Only difference is the metadata here. So you know which response is for which request. This is the correlation ID. And in this case, you can see it started at 2:20 p.m. It completed at 2:27 p.m. So almost it took like 7 minutes to complete this job. But as I said, when the system has a lot of capacity, it's going to complete faster. When it is slow, we expect that to complete less than 24 hours. And also, I want to share this link with you. If you go to aka.ms/AOA batch how-to, you can find the documentation that was there. Yeah, so I want to take any questions that are related to batch now. We'll take a few questions related to batch now before moving to newer topics. Feel free to post your questions in the tech community, the event link. All right, so what we will do is, so I do see a question on O1, but not related to batch. This event is primarily focused on the batch and the data zone offerings that we launched. We'll try to take this as the time goes by, but if you do have any specific questions on the Azure OpenAI batch or the Azure OpenAI data zones for provisioned deployment or the standard deployment, we would encourage you to make your asks in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to turn over the control to Sydney, who's going to walk us through the data zone offering for provisioned. Over to you, Sydney.
Awesome. Thanks, Satu, and thanks for the great presentation on batch. Jumping into data zone provision. So before we switch gears, I always think it's good to kind of figure out, like, where does provision fit? Where does batch fit? Where does standard fit? So I'll talk about that to start with my presentation. And then we'll do a bit of a initial view of what does data zone provision look like, which is an offering that's coming soon on Azure OpenAI. So let's start with where data zone provision fits in. So you just heard Satu talk about batch. Man, for whatever reason, the slides are not wanting to go. Let's see. Let's try it again. Are you able to see the second slide? There we go. Okay. So when we think about kind of the offerings in Azure OpenAI, we have three major offerings. You just heard about one, batch, that Satu talked about. And then we talk about the deployment type underneath it. So you'll see standard, batch, and provisioned. We're actually talking about all three today, which is really nice. We're going to specifically focus on data zones for provision and for standard, which are two offerings that we have, particularly focused on kind of data processing guarantees within your use of Azure OpenAI. So from a data zone provision perspective, this is coming soon. We expect this to land before the end of the year. So you're getting the first sneak peek of what this means and what the possibilities are for data zone provisioned. And then I'll spend a bit of time on what provisioned is, what data zone provisioned offers, and then what to expect when this lands. So diving into it, what do you actually get with data zone provision? I think this is a really common question. It's a great question. So there's kind of two sides to this, right? The data zone aspect really dictates where the data is being processed, how it's being processed geographically, as well as kind of dictating your capacity availability, as well as model availability. Provision is really dictating the type of deployment that you have or the offer that you're using. So when we look at data zone, we have two of them, US data zone and EU data zone. What that really means is we're going to constrain where we process your data to these two geographic boundaries. So US means within the United States, EU means EU member states. We have more about this in our documentation. Khalid will talk about it a bit when he goes into the data zone standard aspect. From a model availability perspective, we like to bring our latest models to data zone as well as our global offering, if you're familiar with that, as well as capacity. So when you think about data zone, what you're really getting is some cross-region routing or multi-region routing, but constrained to a specific environment. This is really helpful for customers or applications or workloads that have specific data processing needs. Maybe you have a compliance need to stay inside the United States or stay inside the EU. Maybe you have specific customers or specific use cases where being in a specific geographic area is what's necessary in order to satisfy requirements. The goal of data zone is to make that as simple as possible, to make it as easy for you to do that. The major thing here is quota and capacity become a lot easier with data zone. Because of that flexibility to be able to go across regions within that defined boundary, we're able to give you more quota and also make those models available across that multi-region space. And then how does this fit in with provision is kind of the second half to this. So provision is really focused on predictable throughput, predictable latency, and being able to scale essentially infinitely, right? And so when we look at provision and we look at data zone, we're going to take this idea of being able to process your data in multiple regions, but within a confined boundary. And also being able to access those really high throughput scenarios with very consistent latency and consistent throughput based on what you buy. And so it's really effective for these large scale workloads, production style workloads, anything where you may have some latency sensitivity that you need to hit a specific latency point or specific throughput point. And so we're able to kind of bring these two together to make this data zone provision concept. Data zone provision, as you saw on the last slide, sits alongside our global offering, which is very similar, but allows that traffic to be routed anywhere across the globe. And then our regional offering, where we're really focused on a specific geography, whether that's, for example, Sweden or Australia or Korea, what have you. So data zone provision kind of brings the best of both worlds, the high throughput of provision, as well as the multi-region routing with some boundary and constraints of data zone. And then thinking about how we kind of maximize benefits of data zone provision. First and foremost, provision has gone self-service. So in August, we were able to kind of open the provisioned experience and give you kind of default quota, as well as the self-service ability to figure out where you want to deploy, how much you want to deploy, how much capacity is available, and how you want to use your quota across any model available. And so there's kind of four major things about this self-service. The first is being able to manage your own quota. Second is being able to apply that quota to any model where we offer provisioned, I should say. You can get real-time capacity insights. We have an API that you can call to understand where is capacity available for my desired model and my desired region or regions. And then you can also purchase reservations on top of this to add financial discounts in there. Data zone provision adds a few extra things on top of that. The first is we have increased default quota for data zone provision. So currently for regional provision, you get 100 units by default. You can apply for more quota. For data zone provision, we're doubling that to make it just easy peasy so you can go and deploy, don't have to worry too much about quota. The second thing, and this is probably my favorite, is we've really lowered the entry point to provisioned, which means you only need 15 units to deploy. If you're familiar with our provisioned offering, in the past, our lowest offer was 25 units, and that was GPT-4o Mini. We're bringing that even further. So 15 units to deploy, and then you can scale in increments of 5 units. What this really means, if I put it in kind of a monthly perspective, 15 units is about $3,900 US a month. And then those 5 units to scale takes you to about, just under $2,000 a month to scale that. So it's really important to look at, where, how you're able to scale, one, starting with a much lower entry point, and then having that granularity to scale in pieces. So you can really match your capacity to your workload and being able to scale with that kind of extra granularity. The last thing that's coming, we will have differentiated pricing, hourly pricing for data zone provision. So you'll be able to kind of match your workload to your exact needs. Global will have some workloads, data zone may have some workloads, and we may have some scenarios where you need geographically specific or regional specific provisioned. So the goal is provision gives you all the self-service benefits, but then data zone adds some additional benefits on top of it to give you this unique offer. One other really important thing to notice about all of our provisioned offers, but I wanted to make sure we highlighted today, we also have an SLA for provisioned, a latency SLA specifically. So our latency SLA also introduces kind of the ability to really hone in on how much you need those latency guarantees and putting a number behind it that you can then rely on. So you'll find the information about our latency SLA in the Azure SLA documentation. You'll find the targets for our latency SLA in our documentation on Azure OpenAI. Some things to think about. Our latency SLA enables you to really get that high throughput, really hone in on your low latency, and really be able to get that operational efficiency as you are able to use that resource a little bit better. Data zone provision makes this even better with those lower entry points and those smaller granularity steps. And then just to end off, Azure OpenAI provision kind of has 6 major things about it. Let's see. There we go. Let me get through all of them. 6 great things about provisioned. We have our latest and greatest models. It gives you the best performance in terms of being able to maintain high throughput and low latency. It's very cost efficient for those high volume workloads because it's a fixed cost. You can really focus in on being able to kind of identify how to find that workload that really fits this provision setup, and then making sure that you have that fixed cost to kind of rely on month over month. It gives you all of the benefits of responsible AI, really allows you to maximize capacity use, and you have that capacity visible to you. And with our latest kind of invents on self-service, it's very flexible. You have that quota that you can use across any model, any variation, any region. And so again, to kind of hit on, Azure OpenAI Provision really helps you get to those large scale scenarios, and Data Zones allows you to get that with some additional data processing guarantees. So we'll take some time for Q&A if there's any Q&A. A couple of common questions just to throw out there. How do I know how much quota I get or how much capacity I get for data zone or regular provisioned or global provisioned? So there's two places to check. The first is our Azure OpenAI documentation. On our quotas and limits page for the Azure OpenAI documentation, you can see all of the information about quota for every type of offer, whether it's batch or data zone standard or global or what have you. We have it outlined in our documentation, so you have a place to refer to. The second place, if I just wanted to be able to go check for myself, like what exact quota do I have as a customer? You can always do that through the Azure OpenAI Studio or AI Studio. There is a quota section where you can go in and look at how much do I have for provision, how much do I have for global batch, how much do I have for data zone standard, and what have you. And then there's always links to access more quota. Please ask. We would love to give you more quota. We would love to enable you as much as possible. So if there isn't enough quota or you need more quota for a workload, please use the links through the portal, or excuse me, the Azure OpenAI Studio or the AI Studio. You can also find the same link from our documentation. A second question that we often get is, why would I use provision versus standard versus batch? The reason we have these different offers is to help you kind of specialize by workload. So you know exactly where to go based on, do you need real-time versus not real-time? Do you need throughput that always scales with the same latency every time? Do you need more data processing guarantees, less data processing guarantees? We have a great section in our documentation called deployment types that talks all about this. And so a couple of things to think about when you're kind of deciding between, the different offers and then the different deployment types underneath it. Each offer is really focused on the types of throughput and latency guarantees that you need and whether it's real time or not real time. Those are going to be your kind of two decision points there. And then the second level down, those deployment types are really going to be focused on data processing. How important is it for you to have data processing in a specific geography, in a specific cross-regional geography like data zones in EU and US, or can it be anywhere in the world? And that will really help you dictate, do I go with batch and global or provisioned and data zone or standard and regional, what have you. So if you haven't checked that out before, I would highly recommend you check out our deployment types page in the Azure OpenAI documentation. One other question just to throw out there, because I know, it's a common one that we get asked. How often or, when do the latest models come to all of these offers? I think it's super important to think about. First and foremost, we always start on the global place first. So global gets the latest and greatest. You'll find that on global standard, global batch, and global provisioned. We always put our offers there first, or our models there first. So if you ever want to just try, buy, test, global is the place to go. Second, you'll find those things in data zone. So across all three offers, when batch eventually has data zone and provisioned eventually has data zone, we'll bring our latest and greatest models there next. And then we'll put everything in the regional area when possible. But you can kind of always keep that in mind. Global will be first, data zone will be second, regional will be after that. And so something to think about with those latest and greatest offers, especially from standard and provisioned. Standard usually launches first. We highly recommend going to standard to try things out, see what it's like, get your feet under you, experiment, and understand how these models work. And then when you're ready to scale up to production level and really start to figure out the latency throughput optimization aspect, that's when provision comes in nicely. So those are my kind of top three questions I get asked from a provision perspective. We'll keep an eye out on the chat for any other questions, but I am ready to pass it over to Khalid to talk about Data Zone Standard.
Right, thank you so much, Sydney. And speaking of deployment types, what I will do is I will go to our documentation and present our deployment types page. So this is under Azure OpenAI Service documentation overview. You have the deployment types. Right now, I am on the Data Zone standard, but this document is really talking you through which deployment type would be suitable for your use case. And as Sydney walked through step by step, what I will do now is just to summarize it. And if you have any questions about Data Zone standard, I will answer that. But to summarize, really, Azure OpenAI Service has batch, provision, and the standard deployment types, if you think about it at the higher level. And in each deployment type, you then have a control over where you want your inferencing requests to be processed. And with the standard deployment types, which is paper token, if you think about it, it is either a global standard where we can process your data anywhere in the world, and there's data zone standard type, which is a new deployment type that we recently introduced. And now where we can process your data becomes either EU, defined by EU nation states, or United States. And then you also have the geographical or regional standard deployments, which will then process your data in geographies like Sweden, Brazil, or Japan. So in a way, data zone deployments is between regional and global deployments. It gives you more control over where you want your data to be stored. It could be US or EU right now, or at the same time, you can get a significantly more quotas compared to the standard deployment types. So I will quickly switch to the our quotas page. This is also under the Azure OpenAI Service documentation. And if you look at it, scroll up a little bit. This gives you the quotas for the latest models for the global standard. So for GPT-4o, we have the 30 million tokens per minute for our enterprise customers. And if you look at the data zone, we are now in 10 million, is less than global standard. However, when compared to the standard deployments, it is significantly more than that. We are talking about 10x improvement on the standard. And of course, these are default quotas. If you need more quotas, you can, of course, reach out to us and we will try to grant those quotas to you. So are there any questions about data zone standard deployment site? I don't see any on the chat. One question that we get often, and I also want to clarify that, today, this is not an HADR solution yet. So, but we hear you. This is one of the top feedback we are getting. Can we make this an HADR solution? But regardless of the deployment type, with AOAI service, we offer 99.9 SLA. And when comparing data zone standard type to regional standard types, there are cases in which data zone standard type would be more preferable. And this is just to give you an idea. If a single region is getting a lot of traffic, which leads to AOAI service returning 503, and then your service pretty much is not usable in that case. With the data zone standard deployments, the service will try to serve its incoming traffic from a different region within the same data zone. But with the standard deployments, you do not have that kind of an option because it is all geo-bounded. So if you already have an HADR solution, what you can try is actually replacing the regional deployments with the data zone deployments so that you are getting that extra benefit plus the more quotas and the model availability. Right, I don't see any other questions, but check that again.
Yeah.
And one question that we also get generally is how to access the new data zone deployment site. Since Azure OpenAI Service is a regional service, what you do in Azure Portal is when you're creating a resource, you actually pick a region. As long as your region is in US or in EU, then you will see the data zone deployment type option in the deployment workflow in the UX.
Yeah, if any of you have any questions on the batch data zone offerings, feel free to put them in the chat. If you don't have any questions, that's fine as well. So we'll probably wait for a couple more minutes to see if there are any more questions.
Yeah, and one other question that we tend to get is how we can disable these deployment options, because now with the global standard, your use cases may not be suitable for that, and you don't want your employees to have access to that at all. You can configure policies in Azure to disable access to both global deployments as well as the data zone deployment types. Don't see any new questions. So maybe we can wrap the call. And if there are new questions, you can always post them in the tech community and we can get back to those.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you everyone for joining. And looking forward to your feedback and the questions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, folks.